This is Rabbi Dr. Juan Marcos Bejarano Gutierrez of Congregation Zohar Yisrael. We had some technical difficulties when we recorded the lecture by Dr. Matt Goldish, so I wanted to provide a very brief introduction. We had invited Dr. Matt Goldish to provide us a lecture on Judaism in the theology of Sir Isaac Newton. We followed up in many ways to a very brilliant lecture that he had provided 2 years ago on Sabbateans and the Conversos at a very critical time in Jewish history. So we wanted to follow up with that, and this is the topic that was decided upon by many of our congregants. At the beginning, Dr. Goldish provides some context to the theology of Sir Isaac Newton during the time of the Enlightenment and explains sort of the outgrowth or the beginnings of the Christian Hebraist movement in many ways, which we actually see continuing to this day. So we'll continue on with the lecture, but we just wanted to provide a little bit of an intro so people will have an understanding of the context for where the video begins.
Religion was being sort of pushed into the margins, out of the center of European thinking. So that's one reason. It's also because his religious ideas weren't as good as his mathematical and physical ideas, and also because he kept his religious ideas very much to himself. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. We do have the masses of manuscript notes that he kept on his religious ideas. And I won't get into this now because it's not our topic, but quite a large part of that collection of Newton's manuscripts ended up in Jerusalem at the National Library for some very strange reasons. So let me try and summarize Newton's main religious ideas here. I won't try and explain how he reached these ideas or these conclusions, but just the basics of what he believed. The first thing is that he believed that the original religion of all people was extremely simple. It was the love of God and the love of man. And that was the religion that was taught to Adam, to Noah, to Abraham, right? He thought that that was the religion that God had communicated to mankind. And he believed that the original practice of religion, of all religion anywhere, it was practiced in temples with a particular structure. There was a circle or a square of seats usually, or at least of people. And then in the center, there was an altar or some kind of other place where there was a holy fire. This would be the fire that was brought on board the ark by Noah and then brought back down, transferred everywhere. And he calls this structure Prytaneum. So Prytanea are the basic temple structure everywhere. So points to the Temple of Jerusalem. He points to Stonehenge. He points to Greek temples, Roman temples. He says this was the structure of temples everywhere where they practiced this simple, basic religion. I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit and tell you something about the significance of that structure for Newton. He said the ancient, and this was a widespread kind of idea that people had, that the ancients knew everything. Our way of thinking in the modern world is that every generation we learn more, we get smarter, we discover new things. Each succeeding generation is better or intellectually superior to the previous one. But just as in Judaism, you have this idea of hitkatnut hadorot, that the generations actually become less as time goes on. That was a widespread belief in Newton's time, that the ancient people knew more because the ancient people lived closer to the time of the prophets. They lived closer to the time of Moses and of Abraham, and for Christians of Jesus. times when God spoke to people. So Newton says the ancient priests in temples everywhere in the world were privy to this divine knowledge. They knew the truths about both God and man and the physical universe. And they tried to codify that knowledge in their temples. Why is the temple structure, the essential temple structure everywhere, a circle or square around a central fire? It's the ancient priests trying to represent the solar system. The sun is at the center, as Copernicus taught, right? And the planets go around it in a circle. So the ancient priests tried to sort of gesture at or codify that knowledge by structuring their temples as models of the universe, like a microcosm of the macrocosm of the solar system. And he said people lost that understanding of why temples were structured that way, and they fell into the false belief that the Earth was at the center. So we know that that was the belief before Copernicus. Okay, about his religious beliefs. Um, he thinks that the text of the Bible became corrupted at various points, but it still tells a story which is essentially reliable. Most of that story has to do with this ongoing cycle of the corruption of the simple original religion, and then the discovery that the rediscovery or revival of the correct worship, and then it's corruption again, and then it's revival again. That, he says, is kind of the story that's in the Bible. Um, and finally, for Newton, Jesus appears and he tries to revive the original simple religion permanently, and that doesn't work out so well either. But belief in the importance of Jesus, and we'll see more about that in a minute, that is added to the original simple religion of love of God and man. Um, so the simple message of Christianity also is corrupted, and it was corrupted in particular by bad converts, people who became Christians but brought their false ideas with them into Christianity. And especially metaphysical ideas, ideas that were complex and not relevant to the basic beliefs that were supposed to be held by all people. Um, so for him, Catholicism, and this, right, he's Church of England, but he's got a certain Puritan streak. For him, the Catholic Church is just the worst thing ever. And he believes that in particular based on his historical researches. And he says the Catholic Church became corrupted by bad converts who joined it. And then these metaphysical ideas that these bad converts brought into Christianity became part of Catholic theology. And in particular, uh, the idea of the Holy Trinity of persons, right? The Holy Trinity that are all equally divine. For Newton, this was an idolatrous idea. He traced the idea, he followed it through the various church councils and the fight between Arius and Athanasius in the 4th century, and he concluded that the church had come out on the wrong side of this. So Newton was what is called an Arian. Now, when we hear the word Aryan today, we think of, blonde German guys or something. I don't know. The original meaning of the word was a non-Trinitarian Christian, a follower of Arius. So Newton did not believe in the Holy Trinity. This became a problem for him later because his church, the Church of England, um, believed in it. It was one of the 39 articles of the Church of England. And I've written an article somewhere about how he managed to sort of stay within the church and sidestep that issue. Anyway, so Newton is technically a heretic within the Church of England. He believes that he can be as a member in good standing of the church with this belief, this Arian belief, but the church would not have seen it that way. And this is the reason that he kept his religious ideas mostly to himself. He only communicated them really to his closest students. So aside from being an Arian Christian, a non-Trinitarian Christian, he was also a millenarian. That is, he believed that the second coming of Christ was going to happen sometime soon. Maybe not in his lifetime, maybe not so very soon, but sometime. And he thought it would be an earthly millennium. Um, he had studied the entire Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, as well as the New Testament extremely carefully. He had learned some basic Hebrew. Um, his millenarian ideas, right, his ideas about the second coming of Christ caused him to focus very much on two books of the Bible in particular, the book of Daniel from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and the Revelation of St. John, the last book of the New Testament, which is a book in which the second coming is appears to be discussed at length and described. He's also very interested in the book of Ezekiel. He has a very specific reading of the book of Revelation, and in that reading, and I haven't seen anybody else make this argument, but I I actually think it's a pretty interesting claim. He says that the author, the prophet, the author of the book of Revelation is telling you a lot of important theological ideas and important, right? But the essential structure of the book is that the prophet is walking through the temple of Jerusalem, and that the various strange symbols in the book of Revelation are actually the kalim, the different vessels and activities and worship that went on in the temple. Um, for Christians, the temple is also a type that is a model, on the one hand, for the universe, especially for Newton. On the other hand, a model or a type of the structure for the church and of Christianity in general. So I won't get into that, but that's the sort of overview of Newton's religious ideas. So aside from caring a lot about the Old Testament, about the Hebrew Bible, why is Newton interested in Jewish texts, and which texts, and what does he do with them? So uh, I want to interrupt now for a moment before going into this by making the following comment. Newton was interested in Judaism, but he was not interested in Jews. And I will tell you how I know this. Uh, During Newton's lifetime, as you may know, Jews who had been excluded from England since 1290 were implicitly, at least, readmitted to England. It's a whole long story. If the Rav wants me to speak about that some other time, I'd be happy to. But there were Jews in England in Newton's time for the first time in hundreds of years. And in fact, right in Cambridge University, where he taught, there was a Jew teaching for a while. That would be Rabbi Yaakov ibn Abindana, who was present there. And Newton, as far as I can tell from all the Newton material that I read, thousands of pages, and everything that anybody has seen, uh, was not interested in the least even though Abendana had a particular interest in the calendar, and Newton had a particular interest in the calendar that I'll come back to in a few minutes, Newton never bothered to walk a few hundred yards to meet an actual living Jewish rabbi. So he apparently had no use whatsoever for Jews. He wanted to use Jewish ideas, Jewish literature for his very specific purposes. Okay. So in what areas did Newton interest himself in Judaism, and how did he learn about it? So when I first started working on the Newton manuscripts in the 1980s, one of the first things that I discovered is that he had quite a few pages of notes on the Rambam, on Maimonides, his own notes on Maimonides. Now, my teacher, Richard H. Popkin, Alav Hashalom, had discovered these notes, and he had written a couple of articles about Newton and Maimonides, and he made the claim that Newton, the Arian, right, the non-Trinitarian, was interested in Maimonides because he was interested in Jewish monotheism, and he was finding that in the Rambam. But I took a closer look at those notes, and I really disagreed with Popkin about what Newton was doing with the Rambam. What I found was that most of the notes were Newton's notes on the Rambam's Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the part of the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's legal code, that deals with the worship in the temple. Technical, highly technical business. Why was he taking notes on Hilchot Beit HaBechira, on the laws of the temple? So, as I mentioned, Newton understood the book of Revelation to be, at its most basic level, an eyewitness account of the prophet's circumambulation of the temple, walking around the temple, and these various strange symbols that, symbols, I guess, is the best word for them, that are all over the book of Revelation, are actually reflecting things that the prophet saw in the temple. So the candelabrum, the menorah, is mentioned pretty explicitly in the book of Revelation. The kior, the laver, where the Kohanim washed their hands, is what he sees as the symbol that's described in the book of Revelation as the sea, right? This body of water. Blowing of trumpets is very explicit and central in the book of Revelation. So he understands that to be the chatzotzot, or the shofar, blown in the temple. The fire on the altar, the mizbeach, and so on. So in order for him to understand the book of Revelation, he needed to understand the worship that was done in the temple. What were the kelim? What were the vessels that were used? What was the worship? What were the daily rituals? What was the Kohen Gadol doing? The worship of Yom Kippur, and so on. And so he used the Rambam, which I believe at this point, even this part was available to him in Latin. It had been translated parts over the course of the 17th century. Various parts of Rambam had been translated into Latin. So he was using the Rambam to understand the book of Revelation. In addition, as I mentioned, the temple was the type or the model for the physical heavens, and the rebuilt temple and the ceremonial of the future, right? At the time of the second coming, presumably, the process included the regathering of the Jews to the land of Israel, the rebuilding of the temple. So he was interested in that, and he was particularly interested in the book of Ezekiel, which describes what we would call the third temple. right? There was Solomon's temple. There was a temple rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel, and then there will be in the future the third temple. And if you're familiar with the book of Ezekiel, it describes this tremendous building and very complicated, strange description. So he was very concerned about understanding the book of Ezekiel and the temple, and he ransacked the books of Josephus Flavius, the first century Jewish historian, for information on that. Josephus had actually seen the temple, been in the temple, and he also tried to use the Mishnah, Masechta Midot, to find out about the temple, so on. A second interest of Newton in Jewish writings was the Kabbalah, but not for the reasons you might think. I have this friend out in Los Angeles named Billy Phillips, who's a leading figure in the Kabbalah Center out there, and he is absolutely convinced, despite everything I have ever told him, that Newton learned everything that he knew about physics, about math, about everything from the Kabbalah. The evidence is very much not in that direction, but Newton certainly knew about Kabbalah and read Kabbalistic material, and I will tell you in what context that was. So Christians had quote unquote discovered Kabbalah right around the time of Christopher Columbus, in the beginnings of the Florentine Renaissance. Count Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, one of the great figures of Renaissance philosophy, had discovered the Kabbalah and was fascinated by it. And since that point, so for over 150 years, various Christians had been studying Kabbalah and working on it. But it was during Newton's lifetime that the big game changer for Christian knowledge of Kabbalah occurred, which is that a group in the city of Sulzbach in Germany published a great big multi-volume work called Kabbalah Denudata, the uncovered Kabbalah, in which large parts of the Zohar, parts of Lurianic Kabbalah, other Kabbalistic material was translated into Latin, and commentaries and introductions were included, and so on. So now large segments of Zohar and other aspects of Kabbalah were available to Christians, and there were a lot of Christians who were very interested in it. So this development is this book is published between 1679 and 1684. Now, Kabbalah was particularly interesting for Christians for two connected reasons. First reason is that Kabbalah bears a very striking resemblance to the ideas of the Neoplatonic tradition. And the Neoplatonic tradition was very essential to Renaissance thought and post-Renaissance thought. I won't go into that, but it was. And so Kabbalah resembled that a great deal, and they found that there was a lot of common ground there. And related to that, there was a strong feeling among a lot of Christian thinkers that Kabbalah supported Christian principles, that you could find hints at Christianity all over the place in Kabbalah, that Kabbalah supported Christianity very strongly. I won't try to go into why that is, but that was a pretty widely recognized position. So now the Kabbalah Denudata appears, and all kinds of people are reading Kabbalah. I'll just tell you, for example, that John Locke was reading the Kabbalah Denudata and taking notes on it, which are still extant. And for our purposes, the relevant person who found the Kabbalah Denudata and was reading it is a man named Leibniz. And Leibniz was Newton's nemesis. Leibniz and Newton had discovered the calculus right around the same time, but Leibniz went into print immediately, and Newton sat on his idea for a long time. As I mentioned, he tended to do that. And then when Leibniz claimed that he had discovered calculus, Newton got very angry and said, no, I discovered it earlier. And they had a great big fight called the priority debate, or the priority controversy, about who had discovered calculus. But that controversy ended up exploding out into all kinds of other areas. So there was this extended and very unpleasant debate between Leibniz and Newton. Leibniz loved Kabbalah. He read the Kabbalah de Nudata, and he used it in his work. And Leibniz was a very, very important philosopher of the time, a polymath. And Newton, right? He's watching his nemesis, Leibniz, using the Kabbalah. Well, Newton gets his own copy of the Kabbalah de Nudata. In fact, we have Newton's copy. It's still extant. And what Newton used to do when he read is and I don't recommend this to anybody here, he would dog-ear or turn over the corners of pages to point to the text that he was interested in. So we have Newton's copy of the Kabbalah de Nudata, and we can see where he had dog-eared it to point to particular passages. Newton hated Kabbalah. He hated it. He claimed that Kabbalah was one of those metaphysical systems that Jews converting to Christianity in the early years of the Christian church had brought into the church with them. It was one of the systems that corrupted the church. And he saw it again as analogous or common with Neoplatonism and other Greek ideas, which had snuck their way into the church and corrupted it. So he hated Kabbalah, and he wrote about it a bunch of different places. And he talked about how much he really disliked it, probably largely because Leibniz liked it so much. Okay. I will mention one other way in which Newton, another area in which Newton studied Jewish ideas and used them. He had been asked to serve on some kind of commission or advisory board as the government of England was considering adopting the Gregorian calendar. So the Catholic countries in Europe had adopted the Gregorian calendar, much more accurate than the Julian calendar, already in the 16th century, early 17th century. Protestant countries were slower to adopt it. England was particularly slow. England did not adopt the Gregorian calendar until 1752, but they were thinking about it. Already Queen Elizabeth the First was thinking about it. And at the turn of the 18th century, somewhere around there, Newton was asked to express his opinion on whether England should switch and what the advantages and disadvantages were, what the history was, and so on. And he did that, and he wrote extensively about it, and we have lots of his notes on the subject. In the notes, he makes extensive use of the Rambam's Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, the section of the Mishnah Torah in which the Rambam talks about the renewal of the month, the new month, and the observations of the moon, and all kinds of things having to do with calendars. Very extensive. And Newton used that a lot. But I noticed that in the final version of his report, which is in his manuscript notes, right, his sort of official statement about his views on the Gregorian calendar, even though in the earlier drafts he had cited the Rambam all over the place, in the final draft, the Rambam either does not appear at all or appears very little. And it's clear that he was a little nervous about using Judaic wisdom or Judaic texts in a public forum on this discussion. So this was not really a full-blown explanation of every way in which Newton used Judaism, Jewish texts, Jewish knowledge, but it gives you a sense of what he was doing with it. And I will just say that uh, it is kind of typical of 17th century Hebraists, that is, Christians who learn Hebrew and study Jewish texts. They are not, for the most part, they are, I'd say almost at all, they're not interested in Judaism per se. They're interested in how Jesus and the apostles practiced their religion, which, let's face it, was Judaism. So they sort of discover that the Talmud is this body of knowledge about how Judaism was practiced, what was done in the temple. After all, Jesus walked around in the temple and had arguments with the rabbis and so on. And people were trying to understand, Protestants in particular were trying to understand what the life of Jesus and the apostles was like in the beginnings of Christianity. So they became very interested in the Talmud and Josephus and so on. The Talmud is almost impenetrable, and Christians hated the arguments that are constantly going on in the Talmud. That's a very Jewish thing. So the Rambam for them was sort of it was like a stand-in for the Talmud. That's what the Rambam says in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah. You don't need the Talmud here. I'll lay it all out for you in a systematic and clear way in Hebrew rather than Aramaic. And so the Christians used it that way also. And the way that Newton used it, very sort of typical. He used it to clarify his own ideas about Christianity. He was not interested in Jewish theology. So, for example, he's really not interested in Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim and the Guide of the Perplexed. He's interested in the halachic work, the legal works, because that's what's useful for him in his own theology. So I am going to, is there a cycle of an increase in knowledge followed by destruction? Probably. I'm going to end there and ask if people have questions or thoughts or concerns or comments.
Dr. Goldish, this is Rabbi Juan. I do have a question, and that is, did he believe that Jews would return from the exile and, in fact, rebuild the temple? Was that something that he was concerned with?
It appears that he did believe that. That was a pretty standard set of beliefs, especially among Protestants in the 17th century, and certainly millenarians. And he seems to have believed that, and he makes comments here and there that it's distinctly possible the Jews will return and they will rebuild their temple, and got to understand what that's going to look like and so on. So yes, he seems to believe that.
I do have another question as well. You mentioned his hesitancy to meet with the rabbi that was at Cambridge, I believe you mentioned.
Yes.
What I understand of Newton is that he was not a very social person, that he had a tendency to be very secluded. He wasn't really interested in romantic relationships. So he was somebody who was very, not just not sociable. I mean, I wonder if some of that had to do with that. He doesn't seem to be a person that interacts with a lot of individuals that are outside of his specific interest. I don't know if that's something that you've come across, or there are other scholars that have argued that it's also a personality issue with him.
I don't think anybody argues that. I think you are exactly right. He was not at all a social person. He had very few friends. The only time that anybody seems to have ever seen him smile is when his friend Henry Moore, Dr. Henry Moore, offered him a certain interpretation of a passage in the book of Revelation, which he liked, and he was so happy that he actually smiled. Apparently, that was the only time anybody saw that. So he did not have a lot of friends. He did not go out of his uh, laboratories and quarters very much at all. He did serve in Parliament for a short time, and eventually he was called upon to be Master of the Mint. And he finally left Cambridge and went to London to oversee the mint, which he did with a lot of vigor. But generally, that is true. He did not go out of his way for social opportunities, for sure. Um, I sort of thought, well, this is not a social opportunity. This would have been an opportunity to talk to a living Jewish rabbi about matters in particular of the calendar. And this Yaakov Abendano was an expert on that. Um, the, uh, didn't do it, as far as we know.
If anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear.
I was saying to the listeners, if they would like to ask a question, they can type it in the chat, or they can unmute themselves.
I think somebody asked a question, but I couldn't hear it well.
Are you able to see the chat, Dr. Goldish?
I am, but oh, I see there. I see, 1 second. There we go. Do I think human history, there is a cycle of increased knowledge followed by destruction of knowledge? So sometimes we get to the same conclusions in different times. Well, there definitely are cycles of creativity and destruction in particular places. I have no doubt that some knowledge is lost. It's sometimes surprising how much of it is preserved. For example, it's kind of amazing how much we know about what the ancient Athenians knew, or the ancient Israelites, for that matter. But uh, certainly a lot of knowledge is lost, and ideas are lost. Yeah. Let's see.
I think one of the interesting things you said about Newton, I had not realized this, but that he was a non-Trinitarian when that seemed to be a very popular idea in his time. Um, any thoughts on how he got there, or just kind of curious of how he was arrived to that thought?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's very clear about how he got there, because he spent years combing through histories of early Christianity and whatever he could find about Judaism, Josephus Flavius, and so on. And he you can follow his thinking by looking through these manuscripts. About how he got to that position. It was not a popular position in his time. There were starting to be, in the middle of the 17th century, some people who held some version of that position. It was still illegal most places. Technically, it was an illegal position to hold in England. But he got there by studying in particular the early Christian. They used to have these big meetings or convocations of early Christians, councils, right? Church councils. And he combed over the records of these councils, and especially over everything that had to do with the Athanasian controversy in the 4th century. And he concluded that the idea of the Holy Trinity was not based on meaningful or reliable readings of scripture, and that had been sort of forced on the church. Ultimately, it was adopted by the church, right? There's still, in many churches, the Athanasian Creed is still read. Athanasius and Arius, or their followers, I mean, they essentially fought a war. And the Athanasian position, the Trinitarian position, became the dominant position because Athanasius and his followers won the war. So Newton was disgusted by this and felt that it was, again, the imposition of an idea that was foreign to the original concepts of Christianity. And he based that on these long, arduous researches that he did in all the records that he could find of the early church. So let's see. If he didn't believe in the Trinity, do you still believe Jesus to be God? So the answer is no. He did not think he was God, right? That's the idea of the Trinity is that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are of equal divinity, and he didn't believe that. He thought that Jesus was very important, a super, right, meaningful figure, and he was a Christian, but essentially the position is similar to what today is called Unitarianism. the that God the Father in Christian terms is God, and that the Son and Holy Spirit are of lesser divinity, or of some lesser level. So it's not that he threw out the idea of the importance of Jesus altogether, but he did not believe that he was divine. So that's what made him an Arian or a non-Trinitarian.
Dr.
Okay,
Goldish, there's another question right above that, I believe.
yes, I'm looking right now. Did Newton's feelings or opinion of Jews and about Judaism change in his later life? Not that I can tell. Once again, he seemed to have no interest whatsoever in actual living Jews. He was interested in an instrumental way in using whatever sources he could find, which included Jewish sources, to research the truths of Christianity, the nature of Christianity, and ultimately to support the positions that he took about the Trinity, about well, in the case of Kabbalah, right, to disprove that, to claim that that was some spurious material, anything that he could find about the temple worship and the right, he used the material for his own purposes. It had no meaningful effect on his attitude toward Judaism or Jews. He thought that they were completely wrong. He does say in some places that well, if you Christians, right, my fellow Christians, if we have all these criticisms of the Jews, well, the Christians haven't done any better than the Jews, right? Look at the false opinions that have crept into the church. Look at the way Christians have treated Jews and other people. So he has a certain sort of general sympathy, but it doesn't go beyond that. It is very interesting looking at 17th century Christian Hebraists to see what their attitudes are toward actual Jews. There was one man, a German Hebraist, I think it was Wagenscheid, who had Jews living at his home for years. He developed very close relationships with these people, and they were his tutors in Hebrew and in Jewish texts and so on. And then he came out with this virulently anti-Jewish missionary text, in which he lashes out about the Jews' falsity and the wrong beliefs and so on. So when I was a kid, they used to teach us that the reason that people dislike each other and that there's so much tension among people is because they don't know each other. They're at a distance. They don't really understand what the other person believes. It turns out that that's not always the case. Some of these Hebraists knew a ton about Judaism and in some cases studied with Jews, and it did not make them any better disposed toward them. Or perhaps I should put it this way: they uh, they felt that the kindest thing and the best thing that they could do for Jews was get them to convert to Christianity so their souls wouldn't burn in hell forever. So from their point of view, they loved Jews, but they didn't love them as Jews. They loved them as potential converts. There's a lot to say about that, but let's see. Was Newton into gematria with Hebrew letters? No, he was not. He does he ever use a gematria or even express familiarity with them? I don't think so. I see what you're doing here. You're interested in whether his mathematical mind worked together with his interest in Judaism. I don't think so. I don't remember seeing that. There are other Christian Hebraists who are interested in gematria and notricon and tamura and so on, but those are mainly the Christian Kabbalists. Newton doesn't seem to have interest in that. Yeah. Anything else anybody wants to know?
I think I do have one question, and that is, given his interest in Jewish text and his controversial views on Christology, very briefly, how did he not get into trouble? I mean, how did he avoid, being declared a heretic or something like that?
Okay. Well, I may be one of maybe two people in the world who could actually address that question, because I was very interested in this. Um, First of all, I will tell you that Newton had a student named William Whiston. Uh, if you ever get a hold of a copy of Josephus or look at it online, the English translation of Josephus, Whiston is the guy who did the translation. So he was a close student of Newton, and he followed Newton when Newton went off to take care of the mint. This William Whiston became the holder of the Lucasian chair in mathematics, which Newton had held at Cambridge. And Whiston, the book on Whiston was written by Professor Jim Force from the University of Kentucky. And he called his book William Whiston, Honest Newtonian. And what he meant by that is that Whiston went ahead and told people that he had presumably learned this anti-Trinitarian position from his teacher Newton, and he told people that he was an anti-Trinitarian, and sure enough, he was kicked out of his chair and sent packing out of the university. He was lucky he wasn't arrested and jailed. And so he's the honest Newtonian. Newton kept his opinions to himself, but he was very close with a lot of right, very close, right? I've mentioned he wasn't a big social guy, but he did have close relationships with several figures who were ministers or high-ranking figures in the Church of England. And he stayed within the Church of England. How did he do that? So my argument that I made, as I mentioned in an article, is that uh, he he combed through, again, this is the way he did everything, right? He did it in the most thorough, most careful possible way. He went through the Book of Common Prayer, which is the standard liturgy of the Church of England. And his conclusion was that you could be a standing member of the Church of England as long as you weren't a minister. You could be a member of the church without actually declaring your fealty to the 39 articles, which include the belief in the Holy Trinity, right? You never actually had to come out and say it. And he, in my opinion, he managed to stay within the church and convince himself that the church was not heretical, and the church didn't call him heretical because they didn't know what he thought. He didn't tell much of anybody. Right? He did tell Whiston and his other student Samuel Clark, but he didn't tell much of anybody else. So the church didn't attack him because they didn't know his anti-Trinitarian beliefs, and he managed to sort of find a position wherein he could be part of the church by noting that he never had to actually declare a belief in the 39 Articles as a member of the English church, as long as he didn't take holy orders, right? He didn't become a minister in the church. Now, as the Lucasian chair of mathematics, he was expected to take holy orders. He was expected to become a minister, and he refused to do it. Nobody knows to this day who pulled the strings, but somebody managed to get him an exclusion so that he could stay in that chair without becoming a minister, without taking holy orders. And so he managed to skate through that situation on the thinnest of ice.
Well, Dr. Goldish, I have to admit that I feel like the scholar that read your dissertation. I'm not disappointed in you, but I'm disappointed that Newton didn't have sort of a more favorable position towards at least Jews specifically. But I think it's fascinating because in many ways that period of time, as you mentioned, was a period of transition with Jews returning to England, and yet he has a Jew right there that he can access, and he misses that opportunity for whatever reason. So I thought his views were more favorable. At least that's what I had, heard through the grapevine. But it's interesting that he was very much focused in on what he was interested in, and that was pretty much it. But I think
if you invite me back a different time, I'll be happy to actually talk about Jews and Judaism. It's just not the subject for that.
No, of course. I mean, and one of the things I was explaining to somebody, because when you first started your lecture, and of course you were explaining the different elements of Christianity, they were sort of confused, and I said, no, you have to understand, it's the context of the discussion. You have a major thinker during the Enlightenment, and the attitudes towards Jews during this period, I think, is very important, because of course we take things for granted now, although with all the things that have been happening over the last couple of years, we've obviously seen different attitudes towards Jews come out more openly. And I just think it's fascinating that whatever his opinions were about Jews individually, he still studied Jewish text. And that was something that was happening, like, as you mentioned, among Christian Hebraists. And I think that's sort of one of the big takeaways, that Jewish texts were of interest. And I think that that deserves attention. I think somebody else pointed here in the group.
Yes, if he was only interested in specific areas of Jewish texts, the exclusion of most Jewish works and Jewish people, and didn't put much stock in the religion, then why did he take any of the text seriously and study it at all? So here is the key. Christians had figured out that the Talmud in particular, as well as Josephus and some other Jewish texts, but the Talmud in particular describes Judaism and talks about Judaism the way that it was practiced at the time of Jesus. It took them a while, but Protestants eventually really understood that, look, I mean, I don't think they would put it this way, but I would put it this way. Jesus and the apostles weren't Christians. They were Jews. That's the religion that they practiced. So if you want to understand them, and you want to understand the New Testament, and you want to understand the environment in which the New Testament was written, you would want to go to every source that you could find. And the richest source probably about that is the Talmud. But Christians weren't really prepared to tackle the Talmud. Jews aren't really prepared to tackle the Talmud, if I could say that, most of the time, right? It's overwhelming. So the Rambam becomes the perfect person, because he essentially tells you, and this is what he says in the introduction to the Mishneh Torah. He says the Jews don't study the Talmud, at least in depth, anymore. It's too much for them. Look, you take my book, the Mishneh Torah. I've organized it. I've taken out all the arguments and the stories and the fables and so on, and I've just told you what the law is in every area. I've organized it, while the Talmud goes in uh, what do you call it? The stream of consciousness style, right? The Rambam has organized it A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, very Aristotelian style of organization. And he says, you don't need the Talmud here, I'll tell you. So the Christians latch on to that. It's written in clear Hebrew, which they can master, or at least some of them can. And they use the Rambam to tell them, okay, here is what happened in the temple. Here is what it means when Jesus did this. Here's what it means when this ritual is described in the book of Matthew, or the Gospel of John, or whatever it is. In fact, Newton's contemporary, a guy named, give me a minute, John Lightfoot. John Lightfoot wrote, he wrote a lot of stuff, but his most popular book is a set of 4 volumes, a commentary on the Gospels based on the Talmud. And every passage almost of the Gospels can be clarified and understood better by using the Talmud, or if not the Talmud stand-in, the Rambam. You can explain so much. And this John Lightfoot wrote this book, which is reprinted till this day. It's still extremely popular, in which he goes through and he says, look, here's how to understand this passage, this passage, this passage, using the Talmud or using the Rambam. So that's what Newton was up to also. He wanted to understand Christianity. He wanted to understand his own areas of interest, in particular the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, the book of Ezekiel. And so he used Jewish sources because they were the most useful, most enlightening for understanding those things. Okay, now let's see. Sorry, I just lost this.
Dr. Goldish, while you're looking over that, I just wanted to, I think I'm about the board, so I wanted to extend my great appreciation to you. We would like to have you back in the future. I'll let you continue to answer questions, but I just wanted to thank you publicly and just thank you for the very interesting topics. Last time it was the Sabbateans and the Conversos, which I think was extremely interesting. And I think you've got a potential some buyers for your Salem Witch Trials book. So, so thank you so much. I'm gonna take myself off, but please, my wife will close it when you're done. And thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much, and Nesiat Tova.
Have
a safe flight. I'm sorry, I'm just looking here. So Stephanie wrote, probably as we see groups do today, they want to pull from Judaism to justify their beliefs, but matters that go contrary are tossed to the side. Well, let me say this. I am right now in the middle of reading an Oxford University dissertation, which they asked me to sit on the dissertation committee for, about the reception of the Rambam in 17th century England. And I can't begin to tell you how complex this is. It's not just Christians sort of taking what they like and throwing out what they don't like. They have typological readings of Jewish texts in which they see all kinds of things hinting to Jesus, hinting to Jesus's relationship with God, hinting to the Trinity, hinting or indicating, right? We have this idea in Judaism, right? The Pardes. There are 4 different levels right? Pshat, Remez, Drush, and So. These are four sort of categories of levels of how to understand the text of the Torah. Well, lahavdil, Christians also have this. They have multiple ways of reading, and sometimes they're extremely complex and sophisticated. And it is true that if you look at it in sort of a global sense, yes, they use what they find useful, and they don't use what they don't find useful. But the ways in which they read Jewish texts, the things they do with them, the respect that they have for them, the reasons that they give them authority, very, very complex and um, much more sophisticated than this sort of general overview that they take what they like and they don't take what they don't like. There are theological uses, there are historical uses, there are typological uses, there are mystical uses, all kinds of stuff is going on there. Um, so it's true, they don't take the big message, they don't accept Judaism, uh, but what they do with these texts is really interesting and not simple, if I could put it that way. Yeah. All right.
Dr. Goldish, there's one more person saying, could you share the name of the book? Is asking that question.
I'm sorry. Could you share the name of my book on this?
Yes.
Okay. So the book is called Judaism in the Theology of Sir Isaac Newton. And here is what I am going to recommend. Do not buy this book. You will not believe how much it costs. Uh, I had to publish it with an obscure European publisher because the big American university presses were apparently not interested in Judaism and Sir Isaac Newton at the time. So what you could do is have your local library order it on interlibrary loan, and they will get it from a library that owns it and bring it to you. That's my recommendation if you're interested in the book.
Thank you. I was also I'm kind of working over here, so I'm hearing what I can. I don't know if I missed it, but you were mentioning a book that takes the Talmud and goes verse by verse with the, I guess, New Testament or something like that. It
Yes.
links them both. Is that your book?
No. So that is a book by, or a set of books by an author named John Lightfoot. His dates are, I think, 1600 to 1675. So he's a contemporary, older contemporary of Newton. And I've forgotten exactly what the book is called, but it's called something like a commentary on the Gospels based on the Talmud, or some, I don't know, maybe I can, well, I hesitate to start looking it up while I'm with the group here, but
No, thank
if you
you.
look up John Lightfoot, you'll find this book. I bought a copy of it on Amazon, I think.
Okay.
So it's the four Gospels, and it goes through. It's really kind of amazing. It goes through passage by passage, and shows you how the Talmud can help you understand it.
Oh wow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Let me just say that I am not a rabbi, but but I appreciate all the nice messages, and it was really a pleasure being with you. And if I do get the opportunity to be with you again, I promise that I will try my best to talk more about Jews and Judaism and less about Christian theology. All right. Thank you
Well,
so much.
wait,
Look at all
thank
these
you,
nice.
Dr. Goldish. We appreciate it. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and interest.